Hello everyone, this is the second video on Frankenstein. In the previous video I looked at the four letters at the start of the book which sort of frame the narrative, and I talked about how that works. I'm currently rereading the book. I've read it a couple of times before and taught it a couple of times before. So I'm rereading it a few chapters at a time, and after I read a few chapters I'm going to make a video just with my thoughts and pointing some things out to you. It would be helpful, I think, if you had your copy of the book while you're watching the video, and maybe pause the video as I go along so that you can find passages that I refer to, highlight and underline them, or write them down on post-it notes, or whatever it is you might want to do. Okay, it's a fairly unstructured video. I'm just gonna talk about different things as they occur to me, and I'll stop before the video gets to 15 minutes and then just carry on from there with the next video. Okay, this video won't go beyond chapter 4, and it might not even get to chapter 4. Okay, so starting on chapter 1, which is page 31 in the book that I'm using. So this is the story as Victor Frankenstein starts to tell Captain Walton about it, and Captain Walton is recording it for his sister. That's how the story is framed, which is a little bit complicated to begin with, I suppose. Okay, so Victor Frankenstein starts with his childhood, and he takes great pains to describe in detail how blessed he was in life. His parents were wonderful, kind, charitable people, and there's plenty of detail that builds that up in the first couple of chapters. I'll read a short passage from page 33. He's talking about his parents. With this deep consciousness of what they owed towards the being to which they had given life, added to the active spirit of tenderness that animated both, it may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, of charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. I really quite like that metaphor. The silken cord is how he describes how his parents brought him up. So the cord is something which controls and directs him in the right way, but it's silken because it's done so gently and so beautifully. He talks in that passage about the responsibility his parents had, with this deep consciousness of what they owed towards the being to which they had given life. It's a very important quotation because as we read the book, that idea stands in stark contrast to what Victor Frankenstein didn't do for the creature he gave life to, the fiend. But he only realizes that in retrospect. Okay, so there's a sort of irony to that passage at that time. He talks about the relationship he has with Elizabeth, and it's a funny sort of family situation because she is sort of adopted into the family from a peasant family that Victor's mum and dad met while they were holidaying near Lake Como in the north of Italy, it's up in the part of Italy towards Switzerland, up in the foothills, I think, of the Alps or something like that. So not terribly far from home because they're Swiss, remember? But Elizabeth becomes not quite a sister, but something of a cousin whom Victor is eventually seems destined to marry. So it's a funny sort of family situation. But what the writer Mary Shelley does is she explains quite clearly the difference in the sorts of people that they are, how Victor and Elizabeth are very, very different. Okay, and I've got a good passage for that. And Not sure where it is at the moment. But basically the idea is that Elizabeth takes delight in nature, okay, takes delight in the simple things. Whereas Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, is driven by a desire to know and to discover and to explore and to peel back the mysteries of nature, to find the reasons and causes of everything. Whereas someone like Elizabeth can just enjoy things for what they are. She can enjoy, the beautiful sunset or the alpine scenery. And constantly in the first few chapters, we're reminded of that. Okay, I'm reading from page 36 at the start of chapter 2. Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardour I was capable of a more intense application, and was more deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. On the next page, it was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. That word there, heaven, it starts to suggest an idea in the book which is really important, which is the idea of man playing God. And the conventional religious idea, of course, would have been that it is for God to bring life into the world and to take life away. And when Victor Frankenstein decides that he should do that, or that he can do that, and he will do that, well, that's the sort of arrogance which is his downfall, and not only his personal downfall, but the downfall of people around him. He talks about wanting to unlock the physical secrets of the world, and not merely being contented with knowing the outward substance of things, but wanting to peel it back, to prod and to pry. He mentions his friend Henry Clerval, who's a very important character in the book, who's the son of a merchant and who wants to go to study at university with Victor Frankenstein, but his father doesn't let him. Okay, I'm going to read a whole paragraph from page 38. I feel exquisite pleasure in dwelling on the recollections of childhood, before misfortune had tainted my mind and changed its bright visions of extensive usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflections upon self. Besides, in drawing the picture of my early days, I also record those events which led, by insensible steps, to my aftertale of misery. For when I would account to myself for the birth of that passion, which afterwards ruled my destiny, I find it arise, like a mountain river, from ignoble and almost forgotten sources. But, swelling as it proceeded, it became the torrent which, in its course, has swept away all my hopes and joys. So there's some foreshadowing here in the sense that we know that he is a totally wretched creature, that all his hopes and joys have been swept away. Now, at this point in the book, we don't know how that happened. We don't know the mechanism or mechanisms for that, but we surely know that we'll find out. In this passage, he seems to refer to the idea of fate, that as soon as he embarked upon this path to know and to discover and to be a scientist, even though he doesn't really call himself a scientist, but this is what he's doing, step by step. Okay, he says by insensible steps, but step by step, his fate arrived and was his undoing. So this idea of fate is quite strong. That's something that can be discussed and perhaps argued about. Just after that, natural philosophy is the genius that regulated my fate. This thing called natural philosophy is roughly what we call science now. Okay, philosophy was a thing, before this time, and that's a big topic to go into, but that encompassed morals and ethics and the nature of the universe and the nature of knowledge and all sorts of ideas like this. The word natural philosophy came into being to describe what we basically now call science in the different branches. And it says there, natural philosophy is the genius that had regulated my fate. There's fate again. I desire, therefore, in this narration to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. So the word science is used there, but the word science there sort of means more like a a field of endeavour or an undertaking. Okay, he starts to talk about all the old natural philosophers that started to inspire him, because one day he happened to just pick up a book, okay, from the works of Cornelius Agrippa, and he mentions other old scientists like Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. Okay, these folks were all sort of medieval, okay, I think they all cover sort of from about the 13th to the 16th century or something like that. And they were sort of doing sciencey things, but things which we would now consider to be like well off track. Okay, these are the sorts of people who are interested in finding the elixir of life. You know, the thing that you could drink that would keep you alive forever. Or they were interested in the philosopher's stone, okay? Something which you could add to any substance to turn it into gold. So we would consider that sort of thing now, you know, sort of pseudoscience and really occultish, more akin to magic than science. But in a certain sense, that's where some of the science in Western civilization sort of started out. And when he gets to university in chapter 3, the first professor he meets says, "Oh, you filled your mind full of rubbish. You'll have to forget all of it." One thing that I want to draw your attention to on page 40 is he was getting interested in galvanism. I'll read out a passage from that page. Before this, I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. On this occasion, a man of great research in natural philosophy was with us, and excited by this catastrophe, which was when the tree was hit by lightning that he observed, he entered on the explanation of a theory which he had formed on the subject of electricity and galvanism. Okay, galvanism was this idea that electricity was the source of life, and there were people who were starting to sort of do experiments around this thing. Okay, and so what some of the scientists were doing, and it's called galvanism because one of the scientists was an Italian called I think Galvani or Galavini or something like that, is he'd get like a dead frog and then put a small electrical current to the frog, and then the frog's muscle would twitch. And so it led them to believe that electricity was sort of the source of life in some sense. I don't know if it was Galvani, it might have been someone else. They got a man who was hanged, and they applied electricity to him just after he died, and it made his muscles move and twitch. And at that point, they thought, well, it applies to people as well. And so this idea about the connection between electricity and life starts to lodge in Victor Frankenstein's head at this point in the narrative. And that's the direction that the story goes in. So that's the scientific context. And how exciting would that have been, you know, at this time, which is more than, this book came out more than 200 years ago. I mean, to think that humanity, that science was on the precipice of being able to reanimate the dead. And it seemed like a viable sort of thing because so much scientific progress had been made around this time. They were learning things very rapidly about how things actually worked. Somewhere in the book it refers to, I might not be up to it yet, about, you know, how they developed the theory of blood circulation, and they realised that the air that we breathe is composed of different elements. Okay, these fundamental sort of breakthroughs had been made, you know, I don't know exactly when, but, you know, recently in a historical sense. So it seemed like society was on the precipice of, you know, of huge life and society-altering discoveries. Okay, I've just covered the first 2 chapters there, so I'll end this video and do the next 2 chapters in the next video.